One, and we are recording with Mr. Michael Vecchione back on here. What a strong start. Obviously, we've done a ton of episodes, and today we were talking about the asshole cop who used his badge to commit a crime. And really, the takeaway I got from this, and it may seem an odd extrapolation, or it might just be a simplification as my normal rah America, but to me, it really drove home the point of like the importance of the Second Amendment. And we'll get all to it, but it was what it drove home to me is like in the end, like you have to take care of yourself. There are an overwhelming majority of good cops, but still you truly can't rely on, just like you can't rely on a doctor to make you better. Like you still got to, wake up and go to the gym. Even with this, even with, the respected, the boys in blue, this to me was like, you have to have your guard up with everyone. I mean, you have to watch everyone. You almost have to trust but verify. I mean, that's what all the special forces guys I have on here say. They're like, you trust but verify everyone every day.
Without a doubt.
But yeah, Mr. Vecchione, introduce yourself for the new listeners and then we'll jump into the story.
Okay, for the new listeners, my name is Michael Vecchione, and I've been an attorney for, I hate to say this, well over 40 years, and I was a prosecutor for 30 of those years. About the last 10 of them, I was chief of the rackets division in the Brooklyn DA's office. And before that, I was chief of trials, and before that, chief of the homicide bureau, where I did this case. I was the chief of the homicide bureau when this case came into our office, and because it was a police officer who was thought to be the murderer. And I say thought because in the beginning of the investigation, it was unclear who the killer was. It came to me as opposed to one of the people who worked for me. The DA wanted, my experience, and I was the chief and I was responsible for cases like this. So I got it. And I was very happy to have gotten it because it was a case that kind of, it was really the kind of case that occurred, except for the person who committed the crime, that occurred during the time of the 90s in Brooklyn, where the crime rate was out of control, and it was starting to get the early 90s, starting to get under control as Mayor Giuliani came in and established law and order again in the city. But this was kind of typical of the kind of cases where that were happening back then. I mean, the murder rate in the city during those years, the late 80s, early 90s, was pushing 2,000 murders. So, I mean, that even for a city of 8 million people, that's a lot of dead people in 1 year. And it was, and in Brooklyn, we had our fair share. So that's who I am, and that's what I will tell you this case. And I think it's that you're right, Tom, that this is the kind of case where perhaps if Mr. Chan, who was the deceased, or Larry Collins, who was one of the injured people in the case, had a weapon behind that counter as opposed to kind of nothing, then maybe there may not have been a robbery at all. Because if I had a gun like that, I would make sure that the people in the neighborhood knew I had it, so it would prevent people from coming in. So you're correct, but I also think there's one other lesson here, and we'll get into it, is how dogged the police department was once the hint came out that it might have been a cop. And I'm not talking about IAB, because Internal Affairs was not involved in this investigation when I had it. It was a precinct detective who actually was the force behind this investigation. He and his captain, detective captain, worked with me, and it was them who really brought this bad cop to justice. So it says a lot for the boys in blue. They get shit upon all the time, but this is one where justice in their minds needed to be served, and they did it. So that's another thing we take away from this case.
And it's a beautiful example of it's like, not, what is it, one bad apple can ruin everything. And
Yes.
you often hear people, and it is for all very distant future listeners, it is 2021 right now. It's, the last year, 2 years, we've seen the ACAB, all cops are bastards movement, which is to me just demonic communist scum. I always have, when I see a cop, I always tell them, I'm like, hey, like the squeaky wheel gets the attention. Don't listen to everyone that says, every person screaming cops are bastards. There are 99 people who are thankful for them. And does that take away from the bad cops that there are? No, not at all. Those bad cops are assholes. But the point I'm getting at is what a lot of people say, and I hate it because it's easier said than done, but we'll play devil's advocate, is if there's only a few bad cops, then the good cops need to do their part to rout them out, which, I mean, sounds, it's easy in argument. It's easy as a 31-year-old sitting in a chair in an apartment to dictate what should and shouldn't be. But this is a case where that is literally what happened.
Yes, it is. And there's one other detective who was not in the initial investigation of the murder and robbery in that liquor store. He made an arrest in a case in another precinct of the lookout in this robbery for a completely unrelated case. And when that guy started to talk to him, trying to save his own ass by giving up the people who did the liquor store robbery, that by that point, it was almost a year old. That cop heard and realized that it was a fellow officer who was the shooter and who was the murderer. He didn't bury it. He didn't put it, in the drawer and leave it there and just leave it alone. He came to me, he came to the other detectives and said, listen, this is what I have. I want to work with you. And he did. And he worked with us, from that point on until we made the arrest. So, this is an example, a really very, very good example of how the 99% of the police officers operate and do their job and honor their badge and protect the citizens of this, of the city, across the country. So, but I guess we should start to talk about what the facts are, so so people know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I'm here. You want to ask me questions, or you want me to ask me some questions, and I'll get into some sort of a narrative at some point.
All right. Well, so for everyone listening, we'll just kind of get on to the, I guess, beginning stages of it. Is what happened is a police officer using his badge to get behind a counter at a liquor store. And I'm trying to figure out how to do this without just retelling the story. What it starts as is, so here's a question then. How prevalent was this before that ever happened? Was this something that you saw in other cases? We always hear about, for instance, towards the end of the Cold War, Robert Hansen, who is now serving life in prison at ADX Florence. He was taking cash payments from the KGB to turn over FBI secrets. Who is it? Ames, I believe it was Ames, the CIA guy who turned over tons of undercover agents during the Cold War, again, for money. So we see this again and again, right? Or, not to, get too political, but Dick Cheney, as vice president, had left the position as CEO of Halliburton, which recorded record-breaking profits during the reconstruction projects during the Iraq War. So we know this happens, where people, most notably, you would say either the military-industrial complex or big pharma. We know this happens, the revolving door, legislators to the governing bodies to the private corporations, and go in that kind of triangle of corruption and making money hand over fist. But it also happens on smaller levels. And, one way you could say is, cops moonlighting. I remember when I was in a fraternity in Valdosta, Georgia, we'd have this ginormous party every spring called Purple Haze. And we'd build up this like fence around the frat house. It was just these like 10, 12 foot tall wooden poles with what looked just like tarps. And it was just to block out, because what we were doing is everyone was just getting shit faced. We were having a bunch of like the new freshman initiates get shit faced. We're all 18, 19. And you don't need to be right on the main road of the college campus where anyone can see a bunch of underage kids getting shit faced. So we have this wall, and then we'd maybe pay off an alumni cop, right? And he'd work the door.
Security, yeah.
But he was also making sure that, if another cop came by, hey, we're getting noise complaints, they see their guy. Yeah, all right.
Exactly.
Much lighter, much more victimless. What this is in between the two extremes, the victimless frat house security and the turning over CIA agents for, who get executed so you can make a buck, really, really in the middle, well, not even middle, probably more towards harmless, not harmless to the victims, was what happened here. So the question I have for you is, how often had this happened beforehand in your own experiences in New York, or just, and I guess the history of American police, do we have this sort of gross abuse of the badge for cash?
Well, in my part of my career, I also did 2 years as the chief prosecutor in the New York City Police Department, and I prosecuted cops for violations of the rules and procedures of the police department, and there I had my fair share of cases in that office of cops using the badge to enrich themselves or to get ahead, to do things that they shouldn't be using the badge for. So was it prevalent? I wouldn't call it prevalent, but I wouldn't say it was uncommon. So it was kind of in between that. But this situation, part of it was very common. And that is the fact that this cop was smart enough as a thief to realize that the way in to this liquor store was to use his shield to go to say he needed to use the bathroom. Now, cops from the time that they've been walking beats would find the friendly place on their beat to use the bathroom. And cops tell me all the time, they know who to go to and who will let them in and who will do this. So keep in mind also, this cop, Robert Cabeza, lived around the corner from the liquor store. So he felt emboldened that he was going to be able to get behind that plexiglass to do this robbery. Now, the part that is uncommon was using the shield to get using it to do this kind of a crime. I mean, you might use it to get a few extra bucks from somebody, maybe he went in there, but to use it and then ultimately take out your gun and shoot and kill the person who helped you out, that was very, very uncommon. So what I believe happened is that the two accomplices with Cabeza realized that they were all thieves. I mean, all three of them. And Cabeza, as it turns out, I now know because I cross-examined them and did all the research into him, was really hard up for money. He was a loser. His apartment he was about to be kicked out of his apartment. His car was repossessed. He had defaulted on his auto insurance. He was a mess. And so he was a thief because he needed to be a thief in his mind in order to make money. He was a lazy motherfucker, very honestly, because, and I'll tell you why. And I'm jumping ahead here, but I'll tell you, when I cross-examined him, his excuse for having the jury believe that he didn't need to do any robberies was that police get paid overtime. And there was a lot of overtime back then because the force was not at its best in terms of numbers. The crime was rampant. So he said, no, I don't need to rob you. Police get overtime. Well, he didn't realize that he was dealing with somebody like me who would check every single thing that he was about to say. And I anticipated that. And I checked the overtime records with the police department. You know how much overtime he did, Tom? None, zero. So he was a bad guy. So he enlisted these two other bad guys to hit this liquor store, which, as from reading this, they believed was a gambling spot. They believed that it was more than just selling, wine and liquor and, in the hood. They believed that it was a place that took numbers, that took all kinds of bets. And believe me, Tom, there were plenty of those around as well.
Yeah, a lot of back rooms where there were mountains of cash.
Exactly. And they figured that's what it was. So Cabeza put together this little gang, a guy named Stover and a guy named Marshall. And it was there, they cooked up this scheme. They were going to wait just before the store closed, and it closed on midnight most nights. I think this was a Saturday, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was a Saturday. But they were going to go, he was going to walk in just before the store was closed to maximize, and you realize this, maximize the profit. If this was a gambling spot, they weren't taking any bets after the gate was pulled down. So all of the bets would have been in at that point. All of the money would have been in at that point if it was in fact what they thought it was. So his scheme was, or his idea was, to walk in there, show the shield, got to use the bathroom. And Mr. Chan, who was the owner of the place, who's a polite, from what I understand from his family and his friends, was a wonderful guy. He said, sure, come on in. He opened up the plexiglass door that was connected to two ends of the counter, and Cabeza got behind it. What Chan didn't realize is that there was a guy right at the front door, this guy Stover, who was watching what was going on. And once he saw Cabeza get inside, Cabeza kept the door open, and now Stover went in as well. So now we had two bad guys behind the plexiglass with Mr. Chan and Larry Collins, who was his helper in the store, completely trapped. There was no place for these guys to go. So what Cabeza does is he demands the money. And Chan tells him, I took all of the store receipts to the bank. All I have is change from, to use for tomorrow's liquor sales. Of course, Cabeza didn't believe that. He said, no, I want the money. I want the gambling money. The guy said, Chan said, there's no gambling here. And what happens is Cabeza fires a shot from his pistol into the ceiling to scare him. Well, it worked, because Chan and Collins dropped to the floor, and they told Cabeza where the money was that was in the store, and it was like $1,500 in the register. Now, keep in mind, they needed all of that change, because when people started to come in, there were no, in that hood, there were no credit cards used. It was all cash, and this guy was not going to take any credit cards. So he had $1,500 in cash to make change, and he was pissed. Cabeza was pissed off. He said to himself, and he said and I found out later on, he said to Stover, can't believe this is a mess. There should have been more money here. And Stover says to him, let's get out of here, because there's already a shot has gone off. And even though, that is kind of an unusual thing in that neighborhood, it was a very bad neighborhood.
Yeah.
Still, you can't count on the cops not coming. So instead of just leaving the store, Cabeza says to Stover, they got to go, meaning Collins and Chan. And he said, they got to go. They saw my face. And Cabeza shoots Mr. Chan, who's laying on the floor of the liquor store now, because he's frightened from that first shot, shoots him 5 times in the back. 5 times, Tom. And Collins gets shot by Stover. Stover isn't as good a marksman and doesn't kill Collins, but does, in some respects, is even worse. He severs his spine with the shot that he killed. And now both of them are laying there, and they now leave the store. Marshall, this guy Marshall, who provided the guns, he also provided a walkie-talkies, which he was able to, which Cabeza was able to tune into the police van so he could hear if the cops were coming. They take off. They run into this big housing project across the street, into Marshall's apartment, actually Marshall's girlfriend's apartment, where they get rid of all of the guns, get rid of the walkie-talkies, give them to her. I think her name was McGee, Rosalind McGee, I think. And that was it. They take off. They disperse. They leave. They separate.
Question.
So, yeah, go ahead.
So, and you didn't include this in the story, and if you did, it went over my head. Was there, was there any scenario in which they weren't going to kill these guys? Because if you're going in using the badge, I mean, you've crossed the Rubicon. They see your face, you're using a badge. There's no way they haven't seen your face. Is this just me giving the bad guys too much benefit of the doubt? Was there a scenario in which it is a gambling front? They get all this money and then it's, hey, you don't go to jail for running this ring. You don't mention my name. Maybe you pay for my protection. It turns into something like that. Or was this from the get-go? Did he know that they were going to kill them both?
I don't think so. I think what happened is what you just said.
Okay.
If this had been a gambling spot and they stole all the receipts, there's no way. Then Marshall, Over, and Cabeza would have been very happy to leave without worrying about it, because Mr. Chan was not going to the cops to say, oh, by the way, my illegal gambling spot was just taken down by 3 guys.
Yeah.
But when it didn't happen that way, and Cabeza realized that he was going to get reported to the police. And keep in mind, don't forget this, he lived around the corner from the liquor store. In fact, later that evening, when the cops are all there and the detectives are there and everything, Cabeza comes by with his dog. He's walking his dog and starts to talk to one of the detectives who he knows on the scene. Hey, what's going on? What happened here? That kind of thing. So Cabeza was not going to take a chance that Chan or Collins, who lived also not far away, were going to, he wouldn't be identified. First of all, if they tell the police that the guy who came in was a cop and had a police shield and got behind the plexiglass, well, now the police will just simply take him into their into headquarters or wherever and have him go through photographs.
Yeah.
And he would have been picked out, because he just would have been picked out. Mr. Chan was a smart guy. The other thing about Chan, and I found this out as I was preparing the case, is this is a hardworking, this is really kind of like the real immigrant story, success story in America. The guy had come to America about 16 or 20 years before and worked, or do you think an Asian guy would work at that point, either in a sweatshop making clothes on the Lower East Side, or in a restaurant. And he worked in restaurants for I think 12 years, 13 years, until he got enough money to open up his own store. And he opened up this liquor store, which was very successful in that neighborhood. So it was a real tragedy. And to compound it, the police had nobody there were at that point no witnesses. Nobody. We're talking about a cold February night. It's dark as obviously hell in the area there, and it's not the kind of place that if there were people out, that these were going to be the kind of people who would say, oh, excuse me, officer, I have to do my civic duty and tell you who I saw. It's not like that.
It was
Mr. Collins also couldn't speak. The severing of his spinal cord, he was not able to speak. He was in the hospital, in rehab, and in the hospital and in rehab for over a year before he gets the ability to speak again. And when the police learn of this, the detectives learn of this, they go to interview him. And that's for the first time, a year or more later, do they find out that there may very well be a cop who was the killer here, because Collins tells him about the shield and how they got behind the counter. The other thing that happens is that these guys are so sloppy, and they would have gotten caught even if Collins hadn't, in my opinion, hadn't told them that, is that they were using automatics. There were shells all over the place. They recovered even a .45 bullet, a round in the ceiling, which is probably the one that he shot. So it was just going to be a matter of time, because Cabeza was not a genius. He probably used a gun that was registered to him, and it would have gotten, it would have gotten back to him. So
I'm listening to everything you're saying, and I'm like, shells are there. Like, oh, I'm never going to do this, but if I am going to be a demon and do this, you're going to do a final one, and you're going to put one in the head of each. You're going to make sure there's no, because if you've already crossed the Rubicon, hey, we have now pulled the shield. I'm now arresting. Now you have to kill them. If you're already shot them, I mean, you're going to make sure. Why would you not? And maybe I'm the devil. Why would you not put one in their head, each of them? Because you have to close it off. And second of all, I mean, maybe I've been spoiled by hanging out with the Delta Force guys, but you pick up the shells. What are you doing? Zero footprint, plausible deniability. But maybe that's the reason why he robbed the liquor store and the other guys are Delta Force is,
Cabeza may have been a cop, but he was not a genius, and he was not detective material. And as we get in later into the story, I'll tell you, well, you know, because you read it, but I'll tell your audience what happens later. And it's the absolute proof that we're not dealing with a rocket scientist here in terms of this.
No, another side comment. I was just thinking of another episode we did where the guy faked being his mom, and the depths and the extent he went to. And I think we were both joking, like, man, like, you just go be CIA. Like, you get paid to do this. Like, but when you come up with these questions, Delta Force picks up the shells. It's like, well, the reason why this guy is not CIA, the reason why this guy doesn't do what, surprise, the Delta Force guys do, is because there's a ceiling to a lot of these guys are evil, but there's also stupid criminals. Like, you're stupid if you think you're going to get, and I understand there's desperation. Some guys don't care if they know they're not going to get away with it, but there's a level of stupidity, of truly stupidity.
We always used to say, thank God these guys are stupid, because, there are very few Lex Luthors out there, who can get away with stuff. Look, even Madoff got caught, right? Madoff was doing this for years and years and years before he started making mistakes. And, this guy, Cabeza, and these other two were by far, were not, as I said before, not geniuses. They were not Mensa members, believe me. Yeah. So they, and the other thing is they involved, before the shooting, they involved Stover's girlfriend, who was present when the guns were all handed out by Marshall. Marshall was the armorer. That was done at Stover's apartment, and his girlfriend was there. They gave the guns, when they went after the shooting, the guns and the walkie-talkies and stuff, they gave to Rosalind McGee, who was Marshall's girlfriend. So they weren't even smart enough to keep this a tight-knit group. Two young women were involved in this whole thing. And, things happen. Believe me, they happen with relationships, as you know. You can't guarantee that these people weren't going to testify. So I believe that I had Rosalind McGee testify at the trial, but I don't remember that part. But so that's what we're talking about. But keep in mind how frustrating it was for the detectives who were involved in this to not get anything, not the hint of evidence until a year later, when Collins comes around and tells him about the cop. And now that's when the precinct detective, his name is Greg Saunders, reaches out to me and says, now I'm in charge of the homicide bureau at that time. I was the chief. And he calls me, and I didn't know Greg, but he called me and said, can I come down and talk to you? And I said, of course. And he came down, he told me what he had. And he said, I said, listen, I'm going to work with you. Just it'll be us. And who you have anybody working with you? And he said, yeah, the captain, either sergeant or the captain, I forgot what it was, who were involved in the investigation. So things started at that point to start falling into place. Collins tells them they believe it's a cop. Then what happens is 2 arrests are made by the uniform cops of 2 junkies, separate arrests. And it turns out, as normally happens, and this has happened to me more than one time, the guy gets arrested. He's probably, I don't remember if he had warrants. One guy did have warrants, and the other guy may have been may have gotten arrested, just didn't want to go back into jail. They both said to the arresting officers, completely separate now. I was out. I can tell you who was responsible for the Eden Liquors robbery. And one guy says, yeah, I can tell you. And he tells him, and he said, I know them. One guy named Cabeza, one guy named Stover, and one guy named Marshall. I know I saw them hanging around. I was out. Now, remember, I told you that it was a cold midnight on a cold February night. Only the worst kind of guys are going to be out on the street, junkies or people who are drinking or whatever. So that was one. You say, okay, you got this one guy, but who knows what his background is like. But then a second guy comes forward, separate. They were not together. They were not friends. The second guy says, I saw them go in. I saw them come out. I heard the shot. I know it's Cabeza. And they all, of course, they identify him as a cop. They knew he was a cop. But Cabeza, Marshall, and Stover. So now we have two separate witnesses who tell the exact same story, well, with little differences here or there. And it jives with what Collins is now saying. Collins was unable to make any identifications, as you could well imagine. I mean, I'm sure that his injury and his year of torture after that was probably preyed on his head, but he was unable to make an identification. But the other guys, so anyway, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead.
No, keep going.
So now we have two guys, street guys, who say these are the people. A third thing happens now. Marshall gets arrested in a neighboring precinct by another detective for, I think, a robbery he had done or some crime he had done like 6 months before this one. Marshall was a 2 or 3 time loser. He did not want to go back to jail. So guess what he does? He says, I can give you the Eden Liquor, the people who did the Eden Liquor, but I want a deal. So we listen to him and we offer him a deal. He tells us it was me. I provided the guns. I was the lookout. It was Arnold Stover who went in, and it was this cop named Cabeza who was the shooter. I said, this was great. Now we've got one of the bad guys, 2 of these witnesses, and we got Collins. This is terrific. Marshall, however, turns out to be what I figured he was going to be, a total scumbag. He doesn't like the deal. So he says, he is another genius. He's already confessed to a detective, confessed on the record. And he now says, you know what? I don't want the deal. What I told you is not true, that kind of stuff, which is totally, I mean, just gives you another idea as to how smart.
Not rocket scientists. Yeah.
Didn't make a difference. We went ahead and they made the arrest. Now, this is a key point. When the arrest is made of Cabeza, I think we arrested them separately. They were all arrested around the same time, but separately. When they made the arrest of Cabeza, I get called to come down and do what we called a ride. ADAs were on call 24 hours a day, 365 a year.
ADA.
To respond to police precincts in Brooklyn, to take recorded confessions or statements from either witnesses or defendants. So that way.
What's an ADA?
Assistant District Attorney.
Okay, sorry.
That's what I was. There's one district attorney. Everybody else in the office who is a lawyer is called an assistant district attorney.
Okay.
So there's an assistant district attorney on call every day of the year, 24 hours a day. And what the job is to respond to precincts when cops make arrests, to record statements made by the bad guys or by witnesses. Now you have a concrete record of what they say. And believe me, those are valuable pieces of evidence. And then as far as the bad guys are concerned, we would videotape the confession and then play it later on at trial for a jury. It's golden to a prosecutor. So they call me. I go down to interview Cabeza, give him his rights, his Miranda rights, and he tells me he wants a lawyer, doesn't want to talk to me. So pack up my stuff and I leave. But I'm able to indict him based upon the two witnesses, based upon Collins, and based upon the confessions that Marshall gave, and Marshall's confession and the two guys. We get an indictment, right? But because Marshall's statement, confession, I should say, implicates Cabeza, when the case goes to trial, the judge says we can't try them with one jury because it would be prejudicial for Marshall's statement and confession naming Cabeza to be heard by the jury. And the reason for that is Cabeza has the right under the law to confront his accuser. Marshall, as a defendant, doesn't have to take the stand. So Cabeza can't confront them because he doesn't have the ability to confront them. So what has to happen is two separate juries. Both of them were in the same courtroom. They heard all of the evidence except when I put in Marshall's confession. One jury had to leave, and only Marshall's jury heard the evidence as to Marshall's confession. Okay.
Okay.
So again, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Now, before we started the trial, I had gotten the case, I got the indictment. I need to go to the scene. If a prosecutor doesn't go to the scene of the crime to see what the lay of the land is, that's a bad prosecutor. Because if you don't know where all the lights are, what the scene looks like, you can be taken advantage of by a good defense attorney. So I get the two detectives who worked with me, and I get my investigators from the DA's office, and we go to Eden Liquors. It's about a year, a little bit more than a year after the shooting, killing, maybe closer to a year and a half. And I walk into the liquor store, and it's exactly the way it was then, plexiglass all the way around. And there were two young Asians behind the counter, a male and a female. It turns out that they're Mr. Chan's daughter and son. So I walk in, and they look at me and say, can I help you? And I show my DA shield, which is identical to a detective, a New York City Police detective shield. And the other guys now had their shields out. Tommy, you should have seen their faces.
Brilliant move, Mike.
I thought they were going to collapse in the store.
Or shoot you.
Yeah, they were. Well, we were on the other side of the plexiglass. I think the plexiglass was pretty good, but I saw what their reaction was, and I quickly said, and the detectives did too. They said, "Mike, come on, come out. Let's go. Come outside for a minute." So we went outside, and Detective Saunders, who was working the case from day one, said, "I'll go in. Let me just quote unquote introduce you, because this is the first time I had ever seen them. The first time I'd ever been to the store." So he smooths things over, and they let us in, and they let us, go behind the counter. Now, of course, I realized later on, holy shit, their father was killed because somebody came in with a shield and wanted to get behind the counter. So of course they acted properly as far as I'm concerned. They weren't going to trust anyone.
Yeah.
So before you said trust and verify, well, they didn't trust until it was verified. So anyway, that was a really an eye-opening thing that, you learn every day. I had been trying cases by that point, Tom, for probably 25, maybe 30 years. And I had done a lot of things in my career. And, but that was an eye-opener. That had never happened to me before. And I thought about it later on. And I said, that was really a rookie mistake.
Yeah.
I should have listened, thought about that before I did it. Anyway, it turns out that I developed a terrific relationship with the Chan family. His wife, this daughter and son, whose name escapes me for the moment. And from that point on, I kept in touch with them. They kept in touch with me. They were there for some of the trial. The trial was a very difficult thing for them to be listening to because of their father's death. So the case proceeds along, and now I'm getting to another twisted turn of events here. We're I'd say about 2 to 3 weeks away from starting the trial. And I'm at my desk, and I get a call from the detective who's the security guy who's sitting on the front desk at the DA's office. And he says, Mike, I got a guy here who wants to talk to you. I said, what? And I asked, what's his name? He tells me it was, oh, what the hell is his name? Give me 1 second. Let me just take a look at this. I can't remember the guy's name. I don't know why.
You're fine.
It was Cicero Murphy. That was his name. So he tells me Cicero Murphy. I said, listen, I don't know the guy. I said, ask him what he's here for. So the detective calls me back and says, he says he's got information about Marshall and the Cabeza case. Now I'm in the midst of preparing it. I'm ready to go to trial. I said, okay, send him back. Comes to my office. And he tells me this story about how he just got out of jail and he was in jail with Jeffrey Marshall. Marshall was in awaiting trial on this case. Murphy was in on another case, some separate case. And Marshall realized or learns that Murphy is kind of a jailhouse lawyer. And what that I mean by that is there are guys who in jail either have had a little bit of a background with maybe they were paralegal, worked for a law office, stuff like that before they got arrested. And Murphy was one of those guys. He had done some paralegal work and he did stuff and did motions and things like that for the guys in jail who didn't want to involve their lawyers or couldn't afford to involve their lawyers. So Marshall figured this guy is my man because he had something in mind. So one day he gets, he also knew that Murphy was getting out soon. He was getting out within a couple of weeks. So he comes to him and he says, listen, I want you to do me a favor. And I think he told him he was going to pay him. And I don't remember what the payment was. And he was going to get him a job. That was the other thing. He said, listen, here's what I want you to do. My alibi, I have an alibi for my trial. And he called it himself. He said, I have a bullshit alibi that I'm going to put before the jury, and it's my father. My father is going to testify that on the day and at the time of the murder, I was with him. And he says to Murphy, he said it's not true. It's total bullshit. But I need you to prepare my father, who's going to be a witness. You've got to prepare him for cross-examination. You got to make sure that he stands up and this alibi is believed by the jury. So Murphy gets out of jail. He is told by Marshall to go to Marshall's lawyer's office where he is going to get a job he's going to give him a job as a paralegal. And that's Murphy's likes that. He says, I'm out of jail now. I need money. So he goes to work at this lawyer's office, right, as a paralegal. And what's his main job? His main job is to prepare Marshall's father to lie on the witness stand in this alibi and to prepare him well, to prepare him for cross and do this other stuff, right? So he does it. He does. He prepares the whole thing, and the lawyer for Marshall knows it. He knows that this, which is totally unethical.
Yeah,
he's not supposed to put a guy on the stand. He knows his line, but he didn't care. He made like one of these things, see no evil, hear no evil.
Yeah.
So I said to Murphy, I said, well, what do you want? He said, well, I need help with this case that I just got out on bail on, I didn't do it. And I said, he said, if you could look at it, maybe I can work out a deal. I said, listen, I don't know you. I don't know if you're telling me the truth. I don't even know if Marshall's father is going to take the stand. We haven't even started trial yet. So I'll let you know. And I gave him no answer. So trial starts about 3 weeks later. And by the way, the reason that he came in to now blow up this whole alibi is he had a little bit of a falling out with Marshall. And we'll get to that in a little bit. several things happened that this guy Murphy was left holding the bag on. So so the trial proceeds, and we get to the point, and it goes well. I mean, Tom, it was terrific. So the last piece for the prosecution was putting on the detective who took Marshall's confession. And I do that. So the prosecution rests, and the judge, it's now, let's say it's about 11 a.m. on a Friday. The judge says to the defense, do you have a case? Marshall's attorney says, yes, we have an alibi witness. So he had given me what they call alibi notice in the event they were going to use it, which is required in New York State, to give the prosecutor a chance to look into the alibi. Well, I had already had that chance because of that meeting that Murphy gave me, right? I said, okay. So now I needed to find Murphy. Keep in mind, it's now around 11:30 noon, and the judge wants to end the case that day. He wasn't giving me 2 days to find Murphy. So I send my DIs, I tell them, find Murphy for me. My DIs are detective investigators who work with prosecutors, right? They come back to me, now it's lunchtime. They say to me, no problem. I said, what do you mean? He said he's over in criminal court. He's been arrested again and just happened to be on the docket in the misdemeanor court, which is about a block and a half away from where I was, that courthouse. And I say misdemeanor court only because every misdemeanor is tried there, but also when people are arrested for felonies, their arraignment, initial arraignment, where they're apprised of the charges, happens in that courthouse. So his case is on the docket over there. I say, go over and get him, bring him back to this courthouse, and let's sit down with him. About half an hour later, I'm in the courthouse where I'm trying the case in the conference room, and my investigators bring in Cicero Murphy. He remembers me. I remember him. How are you? I said to him, are you prepared to testify to what you told me about in my office a couple of weeks ago? He goes, yes. I said, and what are you looking for? Tell me again what you're looking for. He says, Mr. Vecchione, I'm not looking for anything. I said, nothing? He says, I'm not looking for anything. He says, you know why I was in that other courthouse? He said, Marshall calls me from jail and asks me to go pick up a car that he wants me to bring to somebody else. And I agreed to do it for him. The car gets stopped. He gets stopped. And the cops are looking down onto the floor of the car. There's a gun on the floor of the back seat. Marshall set this fucking guy up. And Murphy gets arrested and charged with possession of a weapon. He says to the cops, this is not even my car. This belongs to this guy, Jeffrey Marshall. That's his gun. I didn't even know it was here. So what do the cops do? They go to Rikers Island. They interview Marshall. Marshall says, I don't know anything about that gun. I never had it. I don't even know this guy Murphy. You know, he's full of shit. So Murphy is burning now. He wants to get on the stand and testify, right? So I'm ready to go. The lunch break is over. I say that we go in. The judge says to me, are you ready, with your rebuttal? After the father testified, I said, yes, I am. Father testifies, right? Gives that alibi. I cross-examine him. He was all right. He was very well schooled. I say to the judge, I now have a rebuttal witness. The lawyers, I'll never forget this, Tom. The two lawyers are at the judge's bench with me, and the judge calls us up there and he says, who's your alibi witness? Who's your rebuttal witness? And I say, Judge, you'll see. It's one of Marshall's friends. So Marshall's lawyer looks at me and says, what are you talking about? I said to him, oh, you'll know who he is. You'll see. The detectives bring him in through the back door, and the lawyer looks at me and says, that fucking guy, that's your witness? I said, yep, that's my witness. Your paralegal. You hired that guy. I'm at the bench now. The jury's not able to listen to this. So he almost, oh my God, I thought he was going to drop dead in the courtroom at that point.
Jesus.
Murphy testifies and testifies fabulously, testifies to the whole thing. Anyway, we end the case. It was terrific. I mean, he was a great witness. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Were you going to ask a question?
No, I was gonna say this sounds like your crowning trial of all the ones we've talked about. I mean, this really sounds like the one where you're going full
Oh yeah,
4-star general strategist.
Yeah, it was great. It was terrific. It really was. So I sum up. Everybody sums up. The jury, the marshal, the Cabeza jury, the cop jury comes back in about a day and maybe a day and a half of deliberations. Guilty on all counts. Murder. Now he's facing 25 to life. The marshal jury comes back, I think, a little bit later that evening, and the marshal jury finds them guilty only of the robberies because, and I talked to the jurors afterwards, and they said, you know, he was the guy, he was outside, and we didn't feel that it was right for him to be held. He didn't know they were going to shoot. I said, what about him giving them the guns? He said, well, he didn't know they were going to use them. So anyway, it was okay because Marshall was a 2 or 3 time loser at that point. He was going to get banged, and he did. He ultimately got 15 years for that robbery. Cabeza gets 25 to life. But I gotta tell you what Cabeza was like on the witness stand, because Cabeza testified in his trial. He testified on his own behalf. And this was a huge mistake on the part of the defense attorney, because, and I'm sure this is what happened. I'm sure the defense attorney told him, you don't want to testify. You're going to get cross-examined. And, you know, he was a really arrogant guy who thought that ever heard the expression, a guy thinks that his shit doesn't stink, or that he shits ice cream, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, that was Cabeza. He gets on the stand, he tells this fairy tale about what a great guy he is, and about him doing this, him doing overtime, and that he doesn't need this money, and that, he would never rob a store in his own neighborhood. And he tells the story about how he was walking his dog and he saw this detective and they were investigating. Why would I do something so stupid and then go back to the scene, et cetera, that kind of thing. Well, I finally get him on the cross-examination. And this was really the key. His arrogance, number one, came out because he thought that he was smarter than me. So he figured he was going to take apart this, peon of a prosecutor, because, he was Robert Cabeza and he knew how to handle himself. Well, I started to get into his money situation, which was the Achilles heel for him. And he told me that, no, I don't have any money problems. And then I started to tick off. Did you lose your car? Yes. Why? Because he didn't make his payments. Why? Because he couldn't make his payments. Did he default on his automobile insurance? Yes. Why? Because he didn't have the money and he couldn't pay the insurance. Was his landlord, he had moved, by the way. He was no longer living in that neighborhood at the time of the trial. He was living in Queens in a home. And his landlord in both places wanted to kick him out. And I brought this all out. I said to him, so you pay your rent on time? He goes, yeah, I do my best. I can do it. I said, well, how come your landlord wants to kick you out, right? In fact, he's evicting you. Well, yeah, we don't get along. And I said, what about your new landlord? Same thing. So I now started to build up this idea that the motive for this was that this guy, unlike what he portrayed himself to be, he was really on the balls of his ass in terms of money. He had talked about how he had gotten this other car and he's got this great car now. And I didn't know something at that point and found out later on. And I figured, and what I found out gave me the answer as to, in my mind, how could this guy now afford this other car that he was talking about? Well, that brings me to kind of the end of the story in terms of how this turns out. So the jury didn't buy it. I mean, to have a police officer on the stand on trial for murder, I mean, that's cop who's working. This is not a retired cop. This is a guy who every day put on that uniform and went out onto the street and patrolled the city. He was a murderer. He was just a, out and out murderer. And, of course, the other thing was that the defense attorney tried to downplay what the two drug guys on the street, and I say junkies, but I don't know if they were junkies. I don't remember. Oh, but there's one other thing I forgot. The other part of my defense was Arnold Stover, the guy who was inside and shot Mr. Collins. He agreed to come in and testify against Cabeza and Marshall. So I had him. Now you might say to yourself, and maybe your listeners are saying, well, why would he come in? What was going on with him? Well, I got word from the detectives that Stover wanted to come in to talk to me in my office. I said, okay, bring him in. They bring him in a wheelchair. I find out that after he shot Collins and Cabeza killed Mr. Chan, Arnold Stover, about maybe 5 or 6 months later, attempted and did rob a bank. But the security guard in the bank got the drop on him. And as he was leaving, he shot him, hit him in the back, and did the same thing to him as what he did to Collins in terms of his. So Stover now was going to spend the rest of his life probably in jail in a wheelchair. So he needed a break. He wanted a break. He wanted to see if he could get a break. So he wound up testifying for me.
God,
one other thing.
Karma's a bitch.
He had a brother who had just gotten out of jail. And his brother on his own comes in to talk to me. His brother's name was John. And John, I said to him, what are you doing here? He said, well, I know what happened at that liquor store. And I said, how do you know that? He said, well, Marshall told me the whole story. Marshall was a big mouth, and he wanted to brag about what kind of a gangster he was. And he testified. He told this guy Stover, I did this robbery with your brother and this guy Marshall and a cop named Cabeza, that kind of stuff. So I said, okay, what else? I said, why are you here? What's your motivation? What do you want? He said, well, I would like some help with a new case that I have. Of course, all of these guys were, career criminals. Mm-hmm. He said, but more importantly, what I want to make sure that the jury knows that my brother is not the only one who was involved in this. Because I got word back on the street that Marshall and Cabeza were going to blame the whole thing on my brother. And I know that that's not true because Marshall told me the story. So I had Arnold Stover, I had John Stover now too. So that was the array of evidence I had. I had the two witnesses on the street who the defense attorney tried to say were just two junkies who would be out on the street at midnight on a cold February night. In my summation, you know what I said to the jury? That's what the defense wants you to discount. I said, who would be out on the street at that time? Guys like them, not some priest, not a guy not you people, those kind of guys. That's why you have to believe them. Yeah. And of course, he took down Arnold Stover. He said, because, he's a thief. I said, yeah, but look whose friend he was before he came into the DA's office. It was Cabeza. And John Stover, same thing. So it went well, Tom. And he tried to, and of course, Marshall did his deal with his father. I felt sorry, by the way, for his father. His father was a nice guy. His father was a working man, but he was looking to help his son, like anybody would do. I mean, he perjured himself on a witness stand. That was it. The DA afterwards decided not to do anything because we had already gotten a conviction. We didn't really want to go after this old guy, and it was his son. So after about a day and a half, I told you, they convict Cabeza and they convict Marshall about a half a day after that, right? So it's terrific. Everything is great. Cicero Murphy gets, I don't even do anything for Cicero Murphy. He goes off and he gets convicted on that, on the gun charge. I didn't do anything for him. He never asked me to do anything, so I never did. And I never did anything for him on even the older case. So, because that's how much he hated Marshall. He hated Marshall because, and you can imagine, Marshall put him back in
Set him
jail.
up. Yeah.
So Marshall gets 15 years. Cabeza gets 25 to life. Plus, for the shooting of Collins, he gets time for that on top of the 25 to life. And he goes off to jail.
Now, what about towards the end? Wasn't there like a follow-up? Didn't they start going to a lot of diners?
No, that's what I'm getting to.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So I am now literally the day after the sentencing. I'm at my desk and I'm cleaning up my desk, packing away the file, putting it in boxes to send to our file room. And I get a call from Greg Saunders. I'm sorry, not after the sentencing, after the conviction. And Greg Saunders, the detective, calls me and says, "Hey, Mike, I got to tell you something. I got a call from a detective in Manhattan." I said, "What's up with that?" He said, "Well, ever since the conviction, because what happened is a cop getting convicted, a cop who's working, getting convicted of murder is big news. And it was all over the papers, all over the TV. And the picture that they used of Cabeza was pictures that the press took after they arrested him and they walked him out of the precinct into the car to take him down to court. They call it a perp walk for obvious reasons. So the perp walk pictures, which, Cabeza came out and he was smiling and he got this, he didn't have anything over his head. He walked out. He said those pictures were in the paper when the cop got convicted. And this detective is getting calls from many, many people. And I said, "Well, for what?" Well, it turns out about 6 months after he shot and killed Mr. Chan, he went to a restaurant on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, a really nice restaurant called One Fish, Two Fish, a seafood place. Very popular, very crowded all the time. And he held up the place. He and I forgot if he had accomplices, but I don't remember. And what he did was he went from table to table with a gun and held up all of the patrons in the restaurant.
Dude,
there were about 12 or 15 tables that he held up, took their watches, took their money, took their wallets, took whatever, took their phones, took everything.
It's like a Wild West train robber.
So what happens is all of these people are watching TV. They didn't know he was a cop, obviously, when he was holding them up. And the other thing is he didn't even wear any face covering.
Jesus.
At this restaurant. He didn't wear it. Now, I could understand, as we talked about before, the liquor store, which he thought was a gambling spot. He figured the guy's never going to give me up because he'd be giving himself up. But this is a legitimate big Manhattan restaurant on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, a good neighborhood too, a very good neighborhood. He figured everybody in there has got to have money, and they did. He holds them up. I think it was 12. I think he did 12 separate robberies in that restaurant of people sitting, eating their dinner. No face covering. So all these people now are calling in the detective and they say, that cop who got arrested and convicted yesterday, he held us up at the rest because the case was an open case at that point. So knowing Cabeza, knowing the Cabeza that I know, he gets arrested and charged with 12 separate robberies in the first degree in Manhattan. And now he's doing life already. You would think that it's a no-brainer. He takes a plea, tries to convince the prosecutor to give him concurrent sentences, not something that's on the end of the life sentence, which I know sounds stupid, but he could get out earlier, even if he doesn't do life. He doesn't do that. He goes to trial. He's such an arrogant guy that he believes that he's going to beat this. Tom, there are 12 separate, maybe even their spouses, witnesses who sat on the witness stand and said, "That's the guy who robbed me.
That's the
That's the
motherfucker
guy who robbed me."
who robbed us at
Do
gunpoint.
you
Yeah.
believe this? The judge in the case now at his sentence, he gets convicted of all of these robberies. The judge in the case sentences him to 12 and a half to 25 years for each of the robberies and adds it to his sentence in Brooklyn. So he now has over 100 years at the bottom and life at the top of his, all because he was an arrogant son of a bitch. I mean, this was a guy, Tom, when I can't tell you, when he was on a witness stand with me, he was preening. He thought that he was a good looking guy. He could get over on the jury. You know, they're going to believe me. I'm a police officer. I'm a good looking guy. I have a job. That's the kind of guy he was. And it turns out afterwards, we found out later on that before he did the Eden Liquor case, he had committed a crime as well, another robbery. So this was a very, very bad guy. And it was the work of these three detectives, Greg Saunders, his captain or sergeant, and another detective, Derek Parker, who is the guy that got the confession from Marshall, who came to me, and we put this whole thing together and convicted one of their own. I mean, this is not internal affairs. I want to make sure that your listeners and your viewers know this. These are precinct detectives who were not charged in terms of, of their duty, not charged with investigating other cops. Internal affairs guys are charged. That's what their mission is, to root out corrupt cops or bad cops. These guys recognize that this is one of their own who's making them look bad. I mean, he kills this poor guy, Mr. Chan, who was doing nothing except working in a business that he had put together after 12 or 15 years of hard work. He gathered the money together and opened up this liquor store. So I have to tell you, when you say that this was one of the cases that, you prepared and did how you described my other cases, I have to say this was one of the most satisfying cases that I have ever involved in the investigation and ever, tried. It was satisfying because, and then of course I got the chance to, let the Chan family, I don't think they were in the courtroom because the verdict came in at night, came in at about 8 or 9 o'clock. Oh, and by the way, there's another part of the satisfaction. So the jury's out an entire day, right? Now I had a strong case, you have to admit, no matter against Cabeza.
Yeah.
Marshall, he had that bullshit alibi and, but I had a really strong case against Cabeza. So the jury goes out early in the morning. The judge probably charged them these probably went out around 11 o'clock all day into the night. And then at that point in Brooklyn, jurors were sequestered. They didn't go home. They were held in a hotel. And the judges kept them late to try to get a verdict soon. So they were all, by the time they went out, it was like 9 o'clock, maybe 10 o'clock. They had been working all day long. The defense attorney now started to feel really good. He was another one of these guys who, was to me, a very arrogant guy. Just not a decent guy. And the next day, now deliberations are going on all day from like 10 o'clock in the morning. The court day was over, no verdict, right? About 8 o'clock at night, we get a call. I get a call. I had a guy working with me also, another attorney, that the verdict, jury's in. I go to the courtroom. The defense attorney for Cabeza was so confident and convinced that he had gotten an acquittal that he had his wife with him in the courtroom. He brought some family members or friends. They sat in the first row of the courtroom while he went into the well of the court, all waiting. It was his moment of triumph. That's why he
Mhm.
had all those people there. When they said guilty, Tom, his face, you could have, I mean, his jaw hit the ground. It was unbelievable. I said to him later on, his name was Stu, I said, did you actually believe that you were going to get an acquittal here? He goes, yeah, it was a great, the guy did well on the stand. I said, Tom, so he did horribly on the stand. What are you, crazy? You think that these jurors liked him? He was awful. But he had brought, I'll never forget that. He brought his wife into the courtroom so he could preen and he could, and have her be proud of him getting this cop off. He had one of his biggest clients was the police union. That's why he had the case. He represented the police union when cops who were union members got into trouble. So that was really another part of the satisfaction that I got out of this, because he was arrogant, the defense attorney, arrogant, and his ways and his manner were like that in the during the course of the trial. But Cabeza, no guy that I have ever been around deserved to get 100 years to life in jail more than Cabeza did. And I remember when the Manhattan case was over, and I got a call from the detectives again. They said, "Did you hear?" And I said, "No, what happened?" He said he got convicted for every one of the robberies in One Fish, Two Fish, and looks like the judge is going to bang him, and the judge did. You imagine, Tom, 12 and a half to 25 for every robbery, to run one after the other, not to run together, but to run consecutively, and then consecutive to the Brooklyn case. So Cabeza later on, I guess it must have been around 2016. I had already retired. Cabeza brought a lawsuit in federal court to try to get the case overturned, saying that his lawyer was incompetent, that his lawyer didn't ask the right questions, his lawyer didn't get all of the grand jury testimony, or typical, and he did it himself. It was not a lawyer who did it, and a federal judge shot him down, and that was the end. I don't think he ever appealed it. So right now he's still doing his life up in, I think he was in a prison upstate New York, Sullivan County Correctional, which is where he was. Marshall did his time, got out a little early too. So that was it. But I think, I don't know this for a fact, so I better not say it. I'm not sure if Marshall got into any kind of trouble later on, so I don't know. But in any event, Arnold Stover did get a break. He did get a break. He didn't, but I lost track of these guys. They never came back. But one thing I did forget, and I wanted to make sure that your people know this. I haven't mentioned them since I talked about the actual event. Larry Collins. Larry Collins was working for Mr. Chan and had been working for him for a long time. Larry Collins was a really nice, decent man. Neighborhood guy, guy who went to work every day, worked hard, got his pay, went home, that kind of thing. And he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, because Stover, tried to kill him, but, paralyzed him for life. So I needed, even though he didn't identify, and he couldn't identify either, after we made the arrest of Cabeza and Stover, he couldn't identify them because of many, many reasons. I think because of the traumatic experience of the shooting plus his injuries. And at that point, I didn't need him. But I did bring him in. I did need him for one thing. I needed him to tell the story of how this whole start, how did it start? What happened? I needed somebody to talk about Cabeza coming in with the shield, so he was a very, very important witness for me. You know how he testified? He was in a hospital bed still. And the hospital attendants wheeled him in on the bed into the courtroom. And he testified in a hospital bed in front of the jury in the well of the courtroom. And he testified very well for what I asked him, because I had prepared him. I had gone to the hospital, I'd seen him, I'd done all the work. So I knew, And I figured that in my mind, who is not going to believe this guy, this poor guy who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, who suffered as much as he did, and now he's coming into court to tell you what he knows. And I figured, nobody's gonna doubt him, and they didn't. Of course, it was a very, very dramatic day. And think about it: how many guys could say that that they've had two witnesses, one guy in a wheelchair testifying in Slover in a trial, and the other guy in a hospital bed? And I'm talking about, Tom, not a small little bed, a full size hospital room bed that he was wheeled in with all of the
connections and the bags and the
fluids
wires
and everything attached. Exactly. So,
but that, yeah, it's, I could see where a naysayer would say, oh, this is just the drama of it, right? But I mean, no, this is a guy who was literally paralyzed, like, was going through therapy. Like, he couldn't, it was like this or the equip, you couldn't, but like, it was either this or like video chat. Like,
yeah. And I was not going to, as long as the hospital and Mr. Collins felt that he was, number one, the hospital felt that he wouldn't be further injured, and he was up to doing it this way. You think I was going to give up the opportunity to have this guy wheeled in on a hospital bed to testify to a very important part of this case, how this murder developed, and to testify about him, what happened to you? Like, well, he testified to all of his, his injury, testified to all of this surgery he'd been through, testified to, all of the rehab he'd been in. What are you doing now? He was, he basically was, as far as I knew at that point, he was confined to that, to that bed. And I don't know if he ever got out of it, but I was not passing up that opportunity to do some kind of, video thing, because I think the jury had an absolute right to see what kind of damage this guy Cabeza and Marshall inflicted on this poor guy. And the only way to bring that home was to have the jury look at him, and listen to him, and look him right in the eye, and see that he's, he's telling the truth. And this is what, and I summed up on it. This is what they did. This is what they did to this guy. I mean, it wasn't a pop gun that they were using. It was, actually, Cabeza had a 45. So 45 is a pretty big shell, a pretty big bullet. So I wasn't going to pass that up. And people wanted to, I don't think nobody ever criticized me for it, but if they did, I would say, first of all, he was an absolutely essential witness to tell the jury how this whole thing developed. And he was also essential, in my mind, to show what kind of damage these guys inflicted. By the way, you know what they got? $1,500. They got $500 a piece for killing a person and paralyzing a person for life. That's what they got. So it was one of the cases that I'm very proud of. I really am. And it was very satisfying to have that jury come in and say, guilty. And I remember at the sentence too, the judge was outraged, and he let him have it. I mean, before he sentenced him to 25 to life, he really did. So, of course, he appealed everything. Nothing was overturned. He's, I'm sure, still in jail right now. So I hadn't heard anything about him getting paroled, and I think he would have. And I can't imagine he would have gotten paroled. First of all, he probably would have been horrible in front of a parole board. I can't imagine that he admitted to the parole board that, that he did this, because he didn't admit it at all. So that's the story of Eden Liquors. Man Sing Chan was the name of the owner of the store, with this lovely family, and Larry Collins. They're all the victims, by the way. Mr. Collins didn't have a family. That's another part of the story that was so heartbreaking, is that he didn't have a family. He didn't have anybody, to come in and sit there at the trial and, and give him comfort. He didn't. He was kind of a loner, and he was not homeless. He had an apartment in the neighborhood there, but the others, were, that whole family had their father taken away from them. Imagine a guy coming from China. China's a really tough place, as you well know. Comes here, makes his way here, and he becomes, a successful businessman. And then this greedy animal, Cabeza, and his two cohorts decide that they're gonna, take this money away from him, and they deserved what they got. That's all I can say.
Well, what I was going to say concerning bringing the guy in on the hospital bed is because otherwise, you and I have been making light of it relatively, right? Like, this fucking idiot, this motherfucker, he can't, what are you, stupid? Like, pick up the shells. Like, it's easy to go, this guy's a moron. He's robbing every table at a upper West Side restaurant in Manhattan. I mean, truly, if you're gonna rob a restaurant, rob a McDonald's in bumfuck Maryland. Don't go to the Upper West Side of goddamn Manhattan.
Money, that's what he wanted.
Well, yeah.
That they were affluent, people.
Sure, I mean, I get that, but I mean, if you're gonna do that, you got to kill everyone there, and you don't. So but what the point I'm getting at is, it's easy to point at this guy and go, "What a moron." What that doesn't show is, it's like it's like terrorists in the Middle East, and every once in a while you hear about, someone at an ISIS training camp and they accidentally detonate their vest. And it's easy to laugh and go, these fucking morons, they just blew themselves up. But whether it's ISIS or Al Qaeda or the Taliban or Boko Haram or Hezbollah or whatever, you go, sure, we can say that, but then you also go watch a video of 9/11 or the shooting at the Bataclan in Paris in 2015. So with this guy, it's still this moron. He shot up this place. He did this, that, the other thing. But it's also like bringing the guy in the hospital bed. Like, that there's a reality to this. It's not just, not you dipshit. Sure, dipshit. Here's a guy who's never gonna walk again. Like, here are two kids that are, children of him, adults, but who you come in and flash a badge and they both go, scared stiff because their dad was murdered in cold blood. You have to do that. You have to bring it in and say, this is the very real thing about this.
Well, absolutely. And, it was that he took Mr. Chan's life, but he also, in a lot of ways, took Mr. Collins' life away too, because
100%.
Collins is basically the way that he's going to be for the rest of his life. And all for greed. But if you could have seen this guy Cabeza testify, you'd say, yeah, I could see that guy wanting to do all of this stuff. I could see, because he was, the arrogance he flashed, after he did this, he got another car, and it was a flashy, I forgot what car it was, a flashy car, and he would drive around in it. And I remember I took a couple of shots at him on the stand and asked him if he what's his, did you buy it outright? Do you owe the money? How behind are you on those things? That kind of stuff. So he, to me, was not worth anything. He just had no value to me as a human being after doing what he did. And you lock those kind of people away in cages forever, as far as I'm concerned, because the only thing that they could do is cause more destruction. And it's like he was, the devil had come to Brooklyn and gone into Eden Liquors that night and did what he did. That's how evil this guy was, So,
yeah. But there's also like, and I think I said this to you before, is there is a beauty in taking the worst of the worst. Yeah, and putting him in a cage forever, right?
Yeah.
Sure, death is scary, but death comes to us all. Death comes to you and me, and it comes to the guys in the cages. Like being paralyzed for life, he's very much paralyzed for life. He is now in
Oh,
a
what a
cage.
sentence. A sentence of
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's like there is, again, just like the guy being shot and him also being in a wheelchair, there is this weird, and I say it lightly and relatively because we're talking about people dying, but there is a sort of poetic beauty to it where
Yep.
I mean, where like karma really just comes around and just like a Mike Tyson haymaker, just
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And if for anybody who thought, and I'm not saying that I talked to any of these people, but if for anybody who might have thought after the conviction that, Vecchione did something he shouldn't have done, that guy didn't deserve it, he was a cop, he's working out, to then have the one fish, two fish people say 6 months later, he held up everybody in a restaurant. And to me, that was, I didn't need it, but it really showed everybody what kind of person
yeah.
Cabeza was.
And if you don't put him away,
Sociopath.
yeah. And if you don't put him away, it's going to keep happening.
Well, there's no doubt about it. Look,
yes.
he did it. This is the proof of it. He did Eden Liquors, then he went and did this robbery. And I'm sure that there were other things he did that we didn't even hear about. I'm sure of it. So, he thought that badge was his, passport to whatever it is he wanted to do, freedom maybe, because he just went ahead and dishonored it totally. So it was quite a case. And again, I say it one more time, I give a lot of credit to the detectives who worked on it, because I am sure that during the course of the investigation, they were taking a lot of shit from their colleagues. How could you do this to one of our own? How could this happen? How could that? That's the way cops are. And it didn't make a difference to those guys. And they did what they had to do, and they did the right thing. And they deserve the medal, quite frankly, as far as I was concerned. So but anyway, so
I just realized this might be the longest podcast we've done. I don't think we've ever done an hour and a half before.
An hour and a half.
Yeah. I didn't even realize that. But yeah, no, just side note. Yeah.
And I sent you a couple of other stories you might want.
Oh yeah. No, we're gonna go through it. We're gonna go.
Those are gonna be long ones too, and they're good ones. They're good ones. So.
Oh no, I don't say that as like a critique. It was just more of like.
Oh no, I know.
I glanced at the clock and was like, huh.
Yeah.
All right. But yeah, Mr. Mike Vecchione. Obviously, the first episodes we did, I couldn't possibly find what number they are. I think back in the 200s. For anyone listening, you want to go find them. We went over your books, which are chocked full of these stories: Crooked Brooklyn, Friends of the Family, and also episode 18 with Bruce Sackman. You helped write Behind the Murder Curtain. And
write, not helped write. Right.
Oh, you know what I mean. Don't making me look like an idiot now. But so for anyone listening, if you want to go grab those books, Crooked Brooklyn is on Audible, and Friends of the Family and Behind the Murder Curtain are on Kindle. You can get your phone to read them to you. Just look up on YouTube. So whether it's an audiobook or not, you can turn it into an audiobook. And then as well as all the short stories, those are also in the description. And Mr. Vecchione will be back on here for more stories, and as well as you are writing a book which comes out in spring or summer.
Yeah, in the spring. Homicide is My Business is the name of it. So yeah, it'll be in the spring. It's coming out in the spring. I actually approved the cover the other day, so it's really it's a night. They did a great job, the publishers. So and Tom, and I'm writing now. I'm about 15 chapters into a new book, and believe it or not, when I mentioned before about the devil, it is, I'm calling it a true crime fantasy. What it is I'm using my cases, but I'm tying them together with this kind of fantasy of the devil coming to Brooklyn and being the instigator for cases that create social upheaval. Like there's one with the murder of a cop. There's another with a murder of a housewife in the midst of upheaval in the neighborhood, racial upheaval. So I'm about taking my time. I'm about 14 or 15 chapters in. So but it's going to be a long book. So hopefully I'll get it published. I'm writing it. I haven't sold anything yet, but I have I have a publisher who's interested. So She wanted to see what the first part of the book was about. I'm waiting to hear back from her, and I'm going to keep going, even if I
Yeah.
have to publish it myself.
Yeah, I was gonna say is yeah, who gives a shit? I mean, obviously you give a shit. It's none of the stuff's free. But I said that I think I said the last time we talked is no, I like that. I like seeing you kind of step outside your your comfort zone and not you specifically, Mike, anyone. I mean, I try to do that with this podcast. I try to talk to people who I know are gonna run circles around me because it just there's nothing bad ever comes from growth. I mean, aside from cancer, but nothing bad ever comes from growth.
Right.
And that is I do like that idea of you writing that well, because it makes me think, and I fucking hate that movie because it's so goddamn scary. But Exorcism of Emily Rose, when they're getting the demon out of her in the barn and they're doing the exorcism, it's absolutely terrifying. There's no reason to watch it. This movie is I watched this movie by myself in the frat house I was talking about earlier over Thanksgiving or Christmas break. Everyone had gone home except for me. And I decided I sat in the frat house, I turned out all the lights, and then I ripped a bong and got uncomfortably high and
Oh,
watched
boy.
Exorcism of Emily. To this day, I can never rationalize why I rarely smoke pot. I never watch scary movies. Something possessed me to watch Exorcism of Emily Rose
There
high
you
as a
go.
kite by myself in a dark frat house. And the one thing that's seared into my memory from that was a traumatizing Thanksgiving break. It's about Thanksgiving 2010. But they're doing the exorcism in the barn. And it's the priest is like saying, like, say your names, reveal yourself. I guess that's how you get the demon to come out or whatever. The point of this whole frazzle brains, this is why I have Mike talk, because when I start talking within 2 minutes, it's already just gone off into the weeds.
Well, the way that I am portraying the demon at this point is not as overt as that. It's
Sure.
more an insidious. He's more of an
force.
insidious character and does different things that within the stories. Now, the stories, the crimes that I am using are true crimes.
real, yeah.
They're cases of mine, but I am embellishing and I'm adding this demon to it. It was, quite frankly, Tom, and I'll be very candid with you. It was, I was told by several book agents, that short stories, true crime short stories, are not necessarily favored by people who are true crime fans. They seem to want more long form, and that you write a story, it ends, and they feel that it's much better if I figured out a way to link all of the stories together and to make it a continuous story. And I had come up with this, my ex-partner and when I say ex, my former partner, who's now deceased, Jerry, who wrote the other books with me. We had this idea for a TV show a long time ago. And so I resurrected the idea, and the name, I'm calling it now Fallen Angel. For obvious reasons, but the prosecutor in the case, who is recruited by a secret government agency to take these cases and to become the lead in them, is kind of a guy that the law enforcement community has kind of shunned, and he became a pariah because he convicted a very well-respected federal agent for murders, and they kind of almost boot him out of the profession. But he's good. He's good in a lot of ways, and he's a talented guy. And this agency, through a friend of his, recruits him to be their lead, because they know from other parts of the country and other parts of the world that the devil is behind the chaos that's been happening in other places. And that's where I got the idea, and to link them together. So we'll see. I don't know how it'll turn out. I don't know if people will laugh at me when I finally present it, but
First of all, fuck everybody else. Doesn't matter what anybody thinks. Who cares? But no, I think it's awesome. I think it's awesome. Your point of what I was saying earlier is when they get the demon out, what the demon does is it like names itself, but what it's naming is they kind of tie it into like real history. It's the demon behind, like, there's one demon comes out speaking German, and that was like Hitler. Then there was another one that took on like Nero, and then
Right.
Judas, the worst, who kills Jesus or betrays
Right.
Jesus. But it's
Right.
through. I thought that was kind of. It's like, oh, here's this sort of like ancient force, and it's like it just inhabits people and it drives these things. But yeah, man, no, go out and write it, go all in.
Yeah,
Who gives a
I
shit
am.
what anybody
You know,
thinks?
I got to point you to something else. One of the
Yeah.
things I had done some work for a very large group that was involved in rehabilitation, and forever. They've been working on this forever. And there are some famous people who went into this place for rehab. But I got to know the people that run it through Jerry, and they hired us as consultants. And Jerry and I got asked to go to Venice 3 or 4 years ago to be judges at the Venice Film Festival, because this group gave away one of the awards. One of the film awards was sponsored by this group. So he had to provide jurors, they called them. And we had to go to all these films and ultimately come up with the one that we thought should win the award. Well, one of the films was a documentary by William Friedkin, who was behind the Last Picture Show, I think it was Last Picture Show. And he is also behind he was the director of The Exorcist, the Linda Blair, the Exorcist.
Yeah.
And his documentary was about the church's exorcism office, so to speak, where the priests actually perform exorcisms. And he took the cameras into several of the legitimate, real exorcisms performed by this priest. I forgot now where he was from. He might have been from Rome. But that kind of, I use from what I learned from that documentary, which was quite frankly scary as hell. Talk about, your thing. But when the real thing happens, you see it. And there were, you do leave and you say, could that be true? But Friedkin is a guy who, I don't think he would put his reputation on the line. He's such a big man in Hollywood that he would, go and become a joke by putting this thing out. And anyway, so what I did was I wrapped into this book that I'm doing is that the way that the Vatican gets the idea that the devil has, is behind some of this chaos is that, and we're talking about major chaotic kind of situations, is that one of the priests in the Vatican office of exorcisms starts to do research, and he learns that when these chaotic events and crimes have taken place, that there were exorcisms conducted after the crimes had been taken place. And the idea I wrote was that the devil had, the people who were responsible, the actual puller of the trigger or the stabber, realized that he was possessed or she was possessed and went to have this exorcism done. And he does this research, and he knows that in Brooklyn, and realizes that the cases that he's been seeing in Brooklyn before the prosecutor gets involved has to be the devil, because it has all of the earmarks of these other cases. And they go to the federal government, and they get the president to get a Justice Department, to get the Justice Department to listen to the Vatican, and they come up with this committee of Justice Department investigators and politicians, and the Vatican priests, and this is how they come up with recruiting the prosecutor in the case to do the Brooklyn stuff. So that's the background. So
I love it. I don't keep writing it. Who gives a shit?
Yeah, I'm going to.
Doing it.
I'm going to.
And yeah, to cover all my bases.
There you go. And the fact that you haven't laughed me out of the room gives me courage to continue. So
no. It's so my friend who's now been on this podcast probably 50 times, Roger Williams. Roger's about twice my age, lives in New Orleans. He's an author. He wrote a sci-fi book called The Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect. It's my favorite book. I read it several years ago, and then when I started this podcast, I was like, I wonder if I can get this guy on. But he wrote a lot of stuff that he never ended up publishing, and he's used my podcast as his publisher. So he'll come on, we've done it now like so many times where he'll choose a book of his and just we'll just go through it over the course of several weeks, and he'll just, read from it from an hour. And that's now how it's published. And he has fans who have loved his work because he originally published in like 1990.
Well,
so what I'm telling you is, dude, my podcast is yours. If no one wants to publish it, use my podcast. I don't give a shit.
okay. Well,
Yeah.
the first case that I'm doing, and one I'm in the middle now, the first case that the prosecutor knowingly is involved in, what this group does is they kind of test them. There's a case that he is assigned to, and they realize after this guy's assigned to it that it may be the devil behind this thing, and they don't tell him because they're testing him to see whether or not he has the metal to to handle it.
Yeah.
And he's very successful. And once he wins that, they then approach him and say, this is what we would like you to do. And then so the first case that he does on his own is the murder of a police officer, and an off-duty police officer under. And Tom, I'll just say this, and I don't want to spoil anything, but I told you this case that we just talked about, Cabeza, had a lot of evidence. The case that I'm talking about now, this cop killing case where the cop was the unfortunate victim, had enough evidence, in my opinion, to convict three for three separate cases. That's how much evidence I have. And I won't tell you what happened, because that's part of what I'm writing. But when we get to talking about this, I'll remember to remind you about this conversation today, and we'll talk about all of the evidence and what happened. And I'm sure that you're going to like it, because it ties in with a lot of what's going on today politically and in the streets, and how certain individuals and media people handle certain cases, and how they look upon certain cases and don't look upon cases of that are similar but with different participants. You know what I'm saying, in terms of the media. So that's what this, and this is way before any of this stuff.
Yeah, this is all real shit.
So
Hell yeah.
So anyway, that's hopefully coming down the pike. Now that the winter is coming in and there's very little to do, I'm gonna have a lot more time to write, other than publicizing murder. Homicide is my business, because I'll probably have to get involved with that. So
Hell yeah.
that's it. So
well,
thank you again for having me, my friend. And
as always, dude, and we'll do it again. As always, we'll do
Okay.
a million more. I can't wait for Homicide is My Business, and as well as everything else you're writing. And yeah, man, my podcast is your platform. Fuck publishers.
Thank you.
This is yours. I don't give a shit. We'll do them all the time. Fuck
Okay.
everybody. Fuck everybody else. We'll do it here. I don't care. We'll have the author himself reading it. I mean, that's the gold standard for Audible books anyway, is when the author reads it. So fuck it, we'll have it here. But yeah, man. All the books I mentioned already earlier will be in the description, as always. Mr. Vecchione will be on here again, and it's December, so I'd probably say around this time next month in January. And yeah, man, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having
and
me.
I'll
Merry
text you.
Christmas.
You as well. And I will text you when this one's up, and I'll text you so that we can schedule another one. And if I don't do that by the end of today, text me this evening, because I will have forgotten. So
I will.
but we'll
And
do
Merry
that.
Christmas to all the listeners and all of your viewers, and a happy and great New Year to everybody as well.
Absolutely a very Merry Christmas to everybody listening to this. Only got a couple more episodes, and then I'm going to be doing 2 weeks off. I'm going home to see my parents and turn this whole thing off for a couple weeks
Good.
and
Well,
reset
enjoy
my
it.
brain. I will. Merry Christmas,
care.
Mike. Merry Christmas to all the listeners. Till next time, brother. Take care, Mike.